The rain tapped gently against the dusty diner windows as Maya wiped down the counter. The smell of burnt coffee and fried bacon filled the air, the same way it had every morning of her 22 years. Her apron was stained, her hands rough, but her spirit, though tired. Behind her, the townsfolk whispered, as they always did, "She works too hard for nothing." Poor girl stuck in this place. They didn't know Maya heard every word. She just kept her head down, serving coffee with a polite smile, hiding the loneliness that grew heavier each day. Before we continue, please kindly tell us where you're watching from, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Nup Stories always brings you emotional, dramatic, and educational stories that touch the heart. And then, the door creaked open. A rush of wind carried in the sound of a motorcycle engine still cooling outside. Boots hit the diner floor, heavy, confident. A tall man in a leather jacket stepped in, rain dripping from his hair, tattoos winding down his arms like untold stories. The room fell silent. Every eye in the diner turned to him. "Jake," people whispered again, but this time with fear. "That biker again. Trouble, he's nothing but trouble." Maya kept her head down, but her heart pounded as he walked toward the counter. There was something about his presence, something raw, dangerous, but strangely magnetic. But before Jake could even speak, a rowdy customer grabbed Maya's wrist. "Hey, sweetheart, smile for me." Maya froze. She tried to pull away, but the man's grip tightened. The diner buzzed with cruel laughter. The same men who had gossiped about her all her life now watched with amusement, as if her discomfort was entertainment. And then Jake moved. With one swift motion, he pulled the man's hand off Maya, his voice low but dangerous. "Let her go." The laughter died instantly. The man backed away, muttering curses, and the whole room went quiet. Maya's wrist trembled in her own hands. She looked up at Jake, this stranger with rough edges, the man everyone feared. And for the first time in a long time, she felt safe. But in that silence, one question burned in her mind, and in ours. Why would a man with such a rough image risk a fight just to protect a girl he barely knew? The diner carried on, though uneasily. Coffee cups clinked, forks scraped against plates, but the energy had shifted. Jake slid onto a stool at the far end of the counter. He didn't say much, just ordered black coffee. His voice was gravel, but there was a gentleness in the way he spoke to Maya that no one else noticed. "Rough morning?" she asked softly, setting the cup in front of him. "Been rough for years," he replied, his eyes dark with memories he didn't share. Maya didn't push. She simply nodded, wiping down the counter as if it were the most important task in the world. But inside, her curiosity grew. Who was this man, really? Why did he carry himself like someone who had fought too many battles? The whispers began again from a corner booth. "Stay away from him, Maya. He'll drag you down." Maya heard, but this time something inside her rebelled. For once, she didn't want to listen to the town. For once, she wanted to decide for herself. Jake finished his coffee and stood to leave. He slid a crumpled bill under the cup, then paused. His eyes lingered on Maya, not with lust like the others, but with something softer, something like gratitude. "Take care," he said simply and walked out. The door closed behind him, and the roar of his motorcycle soon faded into the night. That night, as Maya lay in her small, creaky bed above the diner, she replayed the moment over and over. The feel of his hand pulling hers free, the intensity in his eyes, the way the entire diner went silent around him. She pressed her hands to her chest, confused by the warmth there. Why did she care? Why did it matter that a stranger defended her? And yet she couldn't shake it. The next day, the diner was busier than usual. Farmers, truck drivers, families on their way through town. The same faces Maya saw every day. But every time the door opened, her heart skipped, wondering if Jake would walk in again. Hours passed, no sign of him. Then, just as she was refilling an old man's coffee, the sound of that motorcycle cut through the hum of conversation. The door swung open. Jake, this time, he wasn't alone. A group of bikers followed him in, their leather jackets soaked from the rain, their voices loud, their laughter echoing. The townsfolk stiffened, glaring. Maya's stomach twisted. She couldn't decide if she was relieved or nervous. Jake walked in last, his eyes scanning the room until they found hers. He gave a subtle nod, then took his seat at the counter. But the tension was thicker now. The other bikers weren't like him. They joked crudely, knocked their boots against the tables, and made the townspeople uncomfortable. Maya caught fragments of their conversation, something about money, about debts, about a job that had gone wrong. Her hands shook as she poured Jake another cup. "They're your friends?" she asked quietly. Jake's jaw tightened. "Brothers," he corrected, but his tone carried weight, as if the word meant both loyalty and burden. Maya swallowed hard. She wanted to ask more, but she saw the shadow in his eyes and let it go. That evening, the whispers followed her home. "She'll get herself hurt. That biker's nothing but trouble. She'll end up just like her mother, tied to a man who leaves her broken." Maya shut her door against their voices, her heart pounding with both fear and defiance. For the first time in her life, she wanted to believe differently. She wanted to believe that people were more than the stories told about them. Days turned into weeks. Jake kept coming back, sometimes alone, sometimes with his crew. And slowly, Emma noticed things no one else bothered to see. The way he always tipped, even when he barely had enough money in his wallet. The way he never let his men disrespect her, shutting them down with just a look. The way his shoulders seemed to carry a weight heavier than leather and steel. And Maya, lonely, tired, aching for something beyond the diner, found herself drawn to him. But the town didn't stay quiet. The gossip grew sharper. Customers left when Jake entered. The diner's owner, a grumpy old man, pulled Maya aside one night. "You stay away from him, you hear? He'll ruin you. Men like that, they don't change. You'll end up with nothing but heartbreak." Maya nodded politely, but in her heart she wasn't so sure. Because hadn't Jake already proven otherwise? Hadn't he stepped in when no one else dared? Hadn't he shown her a kind of respect she rarely received? And yet, questions still lingered. Why did he always seem restless, like he was running from something? Why did his eyes sometimes go dark when he thought no one was watching? And why, out of all people, did he choose to protect her? Viewers, let me ask you this. If you were in Maya's shoes, would you take the risk of trusting a man everyone else calls trouble? Or would you turn away, afraid of what he might bring into your life? Tell us in the comments below. We want to hear your thoughts. Because Maya's stories is only just beginning. From that night on, Maya couldn't shake the thought of Jake. The way his eyes softened when he looked at her. The way he didn't ask for thanks, only left a few crumpled bills on the counter and disappeared into the night. For someone the whole town branded as dangerous, there was a kind of quiet nobility about him. Something Maya's couldn't explain, something she couldn't ignore. The next evening, after wiping down the counter and stacking the last chipped coffee cups, she found herself outside. The diner's neon sign buzzed faintly above her, flickering in the misty darkness, like it was too tired to shine. She hugged her apron to her chest, ready to head upstairs to her tiny room, until she saw him. Jake, leaning against his motorcycle, arms folded, his jacket glistening faintly from the drizzle. A crooked smile tugged at his lips as if he'd been waiting. "Need a ride?" he asked, his voice low, carrying easily over the quiet night. Maya froze. She heard her mother's voice echoing in her mind, stern and fearful. "Men like that will break you, Maya. They don't bring peace, they bring storms." She heard the voices of the townsfolk too, their whispers sharp as knives. Troublemaker, outlaw, no good. And yet, when Jake held out the helmet toward her, the world suddenly felt bigger than that tiny diner. Bigger than the whispers. Bigger than the chains she'd worn her whole life. Her hands trembled as she reached for the helmet. She climbed on. The engine roared to life, shattering the silence. The ground vibrated beneath her feet. And then they were flying down the empty highway, the cold night air rushing against her cheeks, carrying away the dust of years she had spent standing still. For the first time in years, Maya laughed. Not politely, not carefully. She laughed loud, wild and free. Her arms clung to Jake's waist, her hair whipping in the wind, the dark road stretching endlessly ahead of them like a promise she'd never dared to dream of. They stopped at the old bridge outside town, the one kids dared each other to cross after dark. But tonight, it was beautiful. The stars spilled across the sky, bright and endless, mirrored faintly in the black water below. Jake killed the engine, and the sudden quiet pressed around them. He pulled 2 sodas from his jacket, warm, slightly shaken, and handed her one. Maya stared at him surprised. He could have pulled out a flask, a cigarette, anything that screamed rebellion. But no, just 2 sodas, like teenagers sneaking away from a school dance. They sat on the hood of his bike in silence, the night air wrapping around them. Finally, Maya spoke, her voice a whisper. "Why'd you help me back there, at the diner?" Jake took a long breath, his eyes fixed on the stars as though they held the answers to questions he'd carried all his life. His jaw clenched, then softened. Because no one else did. Simple words, but they cut through her heart like lightning in the dark. Maya looked away quickly, blinking back a sting in her eyes. How many times had she felt invisible? How many times had the world watched her struggle, only to turn away? Jake's answer wasn't polished, it wasn't romantic. But it was raw, honest, and truer than anything she'd heard in years. Weeks passed and Maya's world began to shift. No longer was she just the girl at the diner. She was the girl riding through town on the back of a biker's Harley, her hair flying in the wind, her laughter echoing against the hills. She was the girl who leaned into danger and found freedom instead. With Jake, the world was different. He showed her roads she'd never traveled, places she'd only seen on postcards. They watched sunsets from the cliffs, shared greasy burgers in roadside diners miles away, and sometimes they didn't even talk. They just existed together as though silence between them was enough. For the first time, Maya's felt alive. But the town didn't see love. They saw scandal. "Such a shame," the women muttered as Maya walked past with groceries, shaking their heads as if her choices were a disease they might catch. "She's throwing her life away," the men scoffed, slamming their truck doors a little louder when she passed. The whispers grew heavier, wrapping around her like chains. Even the customers at the diner began to thin out when Ake's bike appeared out front. And then came the hardest blow, her mother. Her mother's voice trembled with fear when she pulled Maya aside, hands wringing at the edge of her worn sweater. "Love won't pay the bills, Maya, and men like Jake, they never stay. He'll leave you with nothing but heartbreak. Don't make the same mistakes I did." Maya's throat tightened. She wanted to argue, to defend him, but how could she? Her mother wasn't wrong about the risks. She wasn't wrong about the pain of men who left. And yet, when Maya closed her eyes, she heard Jake's words again, because no one else did. The town saw a criminal. Her mother saw a storm. But Maya's heart whispered something louder, something the world couldn't drown out. Still, a question lingered, heavy as the clouds that rolled over the horizon, ready to burst. Was she really making the biggest mistake of her life, or the bravest choice she'd ever make? Every night she lay awake with that question echoing in her chest. Every morning she tied her apron tighter, telling herself to stay grounded, to be practical. But the second Jake's motorcycle roared into town, her heart betrayed her, racing like it wanted to leap out of her chest and chase him down the road. The diner became a stage for their silent story. Jake at the counter sipping coffee, always watching her with those dark, unreadable eyes. Maya behind the counter, pretending not to notice, though her hands shook when she poured his refills. The townsfolk saw it too, and their whispers sharpened like knives. "She'll regret it. He'll ruin her. She doesn't know who he really is." And maybe they were right. Maybe she didn't know who he really was. But she wanted to. More than she'd wanted anything in her life. One evening, as the sun bled into the horizon, Maya found herself asking a dangerous question. "Jake," she whispered, her voice barely carrying over the hum of the bike as they sped down the road. "What are you running from?" He didn't answer right away. His grip on the handlebars tightened, his jaw clenched. The silence stretched, thick and heavy, until Maya thought he might never speak. Finally he muttered, "Not running, surviving." The words sank deep, heavier than the roar of the engine. And Maya realized, this wasn't just a man with tattoos and leather. This was a man carrying scars the world couldn't see. Viewers, let me ask you this. If you were Maya, would you believe in a man like Jake, trust him, even when the world says not to? Or would you walk away, afraid of what you might discover if you stayed? Tell us in the comments below, because Maya's story is only getting started, and the answers waiting for her could change everything. The summer sun burned hot over Main Street, bleaching the sidewalks, making the shop windows glare like mirrors. Maya's arms strained against the weight of the grocery bag, the brown paper crinkling in her grip. Sweat ran down her temple, sticking her hair to her face, but she didn't complain. Beside her, Jake walked with quiet steadiness. His rough hand brushed hers every few steps, and though no words were spoken, there was a promise there. A promise of protection. a promise of presence. Maya had grown used to the whispers, the stares, the disapproving looks whenever she and Jake walked together. But when his fingers brushed hers, the world's judgment didn't matter, at least not until that moment, because peace never lasted long in their town. From across the street, a sleek black car rolled into view. Its engine purred like a predator waiting for the kill, the tinted windows reflecting the town back at itself. The crowd slowed, heads turning, conversations cutting off mid-sentence. Maya's stomach tightened. She knew that car. Everyone did. The door opened and out stepped Ryan Harrington, the spoiled son of the wealthiest man in the county. His suit was crisp despite the heat, his gold cufflinks flashing as he adjusted his jacket. His smirk spread across his face with the confidence of someone who had never been told no in his life. "Well, well," Ryan drawled, his eyes sliding over Maya with the entitlement of ownership. "Didn't know angels fell for devils." The crowd shifted, whispers rising like smoke. Maya felt their stares burning her skin. Jake's jaw clenched, his knuckles tightening around the grocery bag he offered to take from her. But Maya laid her hand on his arm, her voice low, pleading, "Let's just go." But Ryan wasn't finished. He stepped forward, blocking their path, his cologne strong and suffocating in the summer air. "You don't belong with him, sweetheart. A girl like you deserves silk sheets and diamonds, not grease-stained hands and broken promises." Maya's face burned, not from the sun, but from a mix of shame and fury. She could feel the townsfolk leaning in, waiting for her response like it was the day's entertainment. Her throat tightened, but she forced the words out, steady and sharp. "I don't need diamonds, Ryan. I need respect, something you'll never understand." A ripple went through the crowd. Gasps, a few nervous chuckles. Some of the women nodded almost imperceptibly while the men exchanged glances. No one had ever spoken to Ryan Harrington like that, not in public. Jake stepped forward, his frame casting a long shadow between Maya and Ryan. His voice was low, a steady rumble that carried more weight than shouting ever could. "Back off." Ryan laughed, but there was no humor in it. His smirk twisted, and the air seemed to thicken with tension. "Or what? You'll hit me? Go ahead, biker boy, everyone already thinks you're trash." The words cut through the street, cruel and calculated. Jake's jaw twitched, but he didn't move. His eyes, though, those dark eyes, burned with a storm Maya had seen before, the storm he always tried to keep contained. And then Ryan shoved him hard. Emma gasped, stumbling back as the groceries slipped from her arms, oranges rolling across the sun-baked pavement. The crowd collectively inhaled, waiting for what came next. Jake didn't hesitate. His fist connected with Ryan's jaw in one clean motion. The crack echoed off the brick walls of Main Street like thunder. Ryan staggered back, clutching his face, his eyes wide with shock and rage. For a single heartbeat, silence, then chaos. The crowd erupted into shouts, some cheering, some gasping, some calling out Ryan's name. And then, sirens. Red and blue lights flashed as two police cars screeched to a stop, tires squealing, doors slamming. Officers poured out, hands already on their belts. Maya's heart plummeted. Finally justice, she thought. They had seen Ryan shove Jake first. They had seen it all. Surely, they would step in fairly. But no, the officers didn't even look at Ryan. Their eyes locked on Jake like wolves circling prey. "Hands behind your back," one barked, his voice sharp, leaving no room for argument. Maya's chest constricted. "No, wait, he didn't start it, he was protecting me." Her voice cracked, desperation spilling into every word. But the officers ignored her. They grabbed Jake's arms roughly, twisting them behind his back. The metallic snap of handcuffs cut through Emma's pleas. Jake didn't resist. He didn't fight. His head was bowed, his jaw set, his body rigid against their grip. He didn't even look at Ryan, who was straightening his suit with exaggerated offense, glaring at Jake like the victim he pretended to be. "Stop it," Maya cried, her hands reaching for Jake as they shoved him toward the squad car. "You're arresting the wrong man. Ryan started it. Everyone saw." But the crowd was silent now, their earlier whispers replaced by the heavy weight of cowardice. No one stepped forward. No one spoke for Jake. Maya's vision blurred with tears. Through the blur, she caught Jake's eyes. They locked on hers, steady, unwavering. His lips moved, barely a whisper, but she knew what he said. "Don't cry, I'd go through hell for you." and then the car door slammed shut. The squad car pulled away, dust rising from the wheels, and the love of her life disappeared behind tinted glass and steel. Maya stood frozen in the middle of Main Street, the summer sun scorching her skin, the smell of burnt rubber lingering in the air. Around her, the crowd slowly dispersed, murmuring among themselves, throwing her pitying looks that cut deeper than knives. And then she heard it, the sound of cruel laughter. Ryan Harrington, standing tall despite the redness blooming on his jaw, smirked through his pain. He dusted off his jacket, adjusted his tie, and chuckled under his breath. A laugh filled with arrogance. A laugh filled with triumph. Maya's fists clenched so tight her nails dug into her palms. Her body trembled with helpless rage. The whole town had watched. They had seen the truth, and yet they let this happen. They let Ryan win. As she gathered the spilled groceries with shaking hands, her ears burned with the judgmental stares boring into her back. Whispers curled around her like poison. She brought this on herself. Running around with a biker, what did she expect? Ryan's family will bury that boy alive. Maya shoved the last bruised apple into the torn bag and stood tall, her face streaked with tears and sweat. Her chest heaved, her heart pounded, and one question rang louder than the sirens that still echoed in her ears. How could love survive when the whole world was determined to tear it apart? Viewers, if you were Maya, standing alone on that street with everyone against you and the man you love dragged away in chains, what would you do? Would you fight the system, even if the odds were impossible? Or would you let go, to save yourself from the pain? Tell us in the comments, because Maya's story, it is only beginning. The days after Jake's arrest dragged on like a nightmare. Though the charges were eventually dropped, thanks to lack of evidence, the damage had already been done. The Harringtons made sure of that. Their influence in the town stretched long and deep, like roots that poisoned the very ground people walked on. Word spread faster than wildfire. Jake O'Connell is nothing but a criminal. The small auto shop where Jake had worked for years didn't hesitate. They fired him with a single cold sentence. We can't afford trouble. And once that label stuck, it followed him everywhere. Every garage turned him away. Every farm refused his strong hands. Every door he knocked on stayed shut. Maya tried to be strong. She smiled when he came home, even when his eyes betrayed the weariness he tried to hide. She worked double shifts at the diner, her apron soaked in grease, her hands raw from endless scrubbing, her legs aching so badly she could barely climb the steps to their tiny apartment. But the bills piled up on the kitchen table like an avalanche waiting to bury them alive. The electricity flickered more nights than it shone. Some evenings, dinner was nothing but stale bread dipped in watered-down soup. Maya would always slide the bigger half of bread to Jake, pretending she wasn't hungry. Jake always noticed but said nothing, his pride too fragile, his guilt too heavy. One evening, Maya caught him staring at a single pawn ticket on the counter, the one for her necklace. She had sold it quietly, just enough to cover groceries. His shoulders slumped, shame written all over his face. I promised you better, he whispered, voice cracking with the weight of failure. Maya touched his face gently, her fingers brushing the stubble on his cheek. Her voice was firm but tender. I didn't marry promises, Jake. I chose you. Her words steadied him for a moment, but deep down, Jake felt the sharp edge of desperation cutting deeper every day. That night he asked her to meet him outside, beneath the blanket of stars. The air was cool, the night quiet except for the crickets and the occasional rustle of wind in the trees. He held her hand, his rough fingers trembling in a way she had never felt before. From his pocket he pulled out a small silver ring. It wasn't new, it wasn't polished. The stone was so tiny it barely caught the light. I don't have much, Jake said, his voice breaking, raw and unguarded. Maybe I never will. But if all I can give you is my heart, it's yours forever. Maya, will you marry me? Tears blurred Maya's vision. She didn't see the tarnished silver or the small stone. She saw Jake, the man who had fought for her, suffered for her, and loved her when no one else dared to. Yes, she whispered, her voice trembling with joy. 1,000 times yes. He slipped the ring onto her finger. It was loose, imperfect, far from the sparkling diamonds Ryan Harrington would have flaunted. But to Maya, it was more beautiful than any jewel in the world. They kissed beneath the starlight, two souls clinging to each other as if the rest of the world had fallen away. For a fleeting moment, it didn't matter that the world called him criminal or her fool. For a fleeting moment, they were infinite. But as they held each other close, a shadow of doubt crept into Maya's heart. She buried her face in his chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat, and wondered, could love truly survive on nothing but hope when the weight of poverty pressed heavier each day? Weeks blurred into months. The diner became Maya's battlefield. Every plate she carried another brick holding up their fragile home. Jake took whatever work he could find fixing broken fences, patching roofs, hauling hay, but none of it was steady. The town kept its distance. The Harrington name still whispered like a curse. One evening after another long shift, Maya came home to find Jake sitting at the table, head bowed, fists clenched. In front of him lay a letter. She recognized the seal immediately, the county fair committee. "What is it?" she asked, setting her bag down. Jake lifted his eyes, fire burning behind the exhaustion. "They're hosting a motorcycle race. Cash prize big enough to clear the bills. Maya, this might be our chance." Her heart lurched. She knew what those races meant. Danger, rival riders, the risk of wreckage. The same men who despised Jake would be waiting for a chance to see him fall. "Jake," she whispered, fearfully threatening her voice. But he reached across the table, his rough hand covering hers. "I have to try. I can't let them keep me on my knees. I need to prove, to them, to us, that I'm not beaten." Maya looked at him, her heart torn between fear and pride. The world had stripped them of everything but each other. And now Jake wanted to risk the one thing she couldn't bear to lose, himself. That night, as she lay awake beside him, Maya traced the silver ring on her finger and stared at the ceiling, the weight of uncertainty pressing down. She thought of the diner whispers, her mother's warnings, the laughter of Ryan Harrington, and the unshakable fire in Jake's eyes. She thought of the way he held her, the way his voice broke when he promised forever, the way his heart beat like a promise beneath her cheek. And she knew, no matter what the town thought, no matter how steep the road ahead, her answer was the same. "Yes," she whispered again into the dark. But deep inside another question lingered, heavier and sharper than ever. When love was tested not just by judgment, but by survival itself. How long could two hearts hold out against a world determined to break them? The church bells didn't ring that day. There were no roses, no silk gowns, no golden chandeliers. Just a small, weathered chapel at the edge of town, its paint peeling, its wooden pews half empty. The air smelled faintly of dust and candle wax, the kind of scent that clung to places forgotten by wealth and untouched by grandeur. Maya walked down the aisle in a borrowed white dress, the hem slightly torn, the lace yellowed with age. Her shoes pinched, her veil slipped as she walked, and yet she carried herself with quiet grace. Her bouquet was nothing more than a handful of wildflowers she had picked herself that morning, still damp with dew. But when Jake turned to see her, his eyes glistened as though she were the most radiant bride to ever live. His suit was second-hand, his tie slightly crooked, but his smile, the kind that spoke of devotion, of loyalty, of forever, outshone everything around them. The priest spoke simple words, but each vow struck Emma's heart with the weight of eternity. "I take you, Maya, for richer or poorer. I take you, Jake, for better or worse." The chapel was hushed, their words echoing softly in the rafters. When their lips met, sealing the promise, the small crowd clapped politely, and the chapel filled with a quiet joy. A fragile joy. But outside those doors, the world was not so kind. A group of townsfolk lingered in the street, their whispers sharp as knives. "Can you believe she actually married him? Such a waste. She could have had a real future. She'll regret it, just wait." Even Maya's own mother stood stiffly by the chapel gate, her face tight, her eyes heavy with weary disappointment. She pulled Maya aside before they left, her voice barely a whisper. "Love won't pay the bills, Maya," her mother said, her tone equal parts warning and sorrow. "One day you'll see." Maya's heart squeezed with pain, but before doubt could take root, Jake's warm hand found hers. He didn't need words. The strength of his grip said it all. She chose silence over fear, trust over hesitation. Together, they climbed onto his motorcycle. The tin cans tied behind rattled against the dirt road, a poor man's wedding bells. The wind swept through Maya's hair as the engine roared, carrying them away from judgment and into their uncertain future. And as they sped away, One question echoed louder than all the gossip, louder even than her mother's words. Had Maya just sealed her fate in misery or in miracle? Their first home was a cramped, run-down apartment above an old bakery. The walls were thin, the pipes rattled at night, and the smell of burnt bread clung to the air. Their furniture was mismatched, donated by kind neighbors or salvaged from yard sales. The bed creaked, the couch sagged, and the curtains were little more than sheets pinned up with clothespins. Yet to Maya it was a palace because Jake was there. Every morning, she woke to the sound of him humming while fixing the squeaky door or tinkering with the broken toaster. Every night she fell asleep with his arm around her, his breath steady against her neck. They laughed when rain leaked through the roof and had to set out pots and pans to catch the drops. They danced barefoot in the kitchen when the radio played their song, their shadows swaying across the cracked linoleum floor. But the sweetness of their love didn't erase the bitterness of struggle. Bills arrived like clockwork, each envelope heavier than the last. The Harringtons' influence was everywhere, blocking job opportunities for Jake. The diner barely paid Maya enough to cover food, let alone rent. And still, the whispers followed them. She's already wearing herself thin. He'll drag her down with him. Poor thing, she hasn't seen it yet. One afternoon, Maya ran into Ryan Harrington outside the grocery store. He leaned against his shiny car, smirking, arms folded. "Congratulations on your little wedding," he said with mock sweetness. "Shame, really. You could have had so much more." Maya gripped the paper bag tighter, her knuckles white. "I have everything I need." Ryan laughed, the sound sharp as glass. "We'll see how long that lasts." His words followed her home, lingering like poison in her chest. But when she stepped into the apartment and saw Jake fixing the broken heater with nothing but determination and hope, her heart steadied. That night, they shared a dinner of instant noodles and stale bread. Jake set a single candle on the table to make it special. Maya smiled across the flame, her eyes full of love. "Someday," Jake promised, "I'll give you more than this. A house, a garden, maybe even a swing on the porch." Maya reached across the table, taking his hand. "I don't need more. I just need you." He squeezed her hand, but behind his smile, Maya saw it. The worry, the guilt, the endless weight he carried. Weeks turned into months. Their struggles grew heavier, but so did their bond. Maya worked longer shifts, and Jake found odd jobs no one else wanted, shoveling snow, hauling trash, patching fences. He came home with bruises, cuts, and calloused hands. But he always came home, and yet the shadow of doubt crept closer each day. One evening, Maya overheard two women at the diner whispering. "She's glowing now, but give it time. Love doesn't fill an empty stomach. She'll wake up one day and realize she traded her future for scraps." Maya carried their plates to the table without a word, her heart aching. That night, she lay awake beside Jake, listening to the distant sound of traffic through their cracked window. She traced the silver ring on her finger, small and imperfect, and wondered if the women were right. But then Jake stirred beside her, half asleep, and pulled her closer with a soft murmur. "Don't let go." And Maya knew she couldn't. Their love was fragile, yes, but it was also fierce. Every time the town pushed them down, they found a way to rise again. Every whisper of doubt was drowned out by the quiet certainty they found in each other's arms. But the world was relentless, and poverty pressed heavier with each passing day. Still, Maya held on to one truth, one question that burned brighter than all the doubts, sharper than all the whispers. Were they fighting a losing battle, or building the kind of love that could outlast every storm? Winter crept into their tiny apartment, slipping through every crack and rattling the thin glass of the windows. The wallpaper curled in the corners like old parchment, yellowed with time and neglect. The heater wheezed and coughed, barely pushing warmth into the room, while the refrigerator hummed an empty, lonely tune over shelves that held little more than a carton of milk, half a loaf of bread, and a single wrinkled apple. Maya sat cross-legged on the floor, folding laundry by candlelight. The glow flickered across her face, softening the shadows of exhaustion beneath her eyes. The apartment smelled faintly of wax and detergent, a poor substitute for comfort, but it was all they had. She hummed quietly, forcing her mind away from hunger and unpaid bills. Then it came. 3 sharp knocks, firm, commanding, the sound of authority. The candle flame quivered. Maya froze, clutching Jake's shirt in her lap, her breath shallow. Jake looked up from the corner where he was mending a broken chair, his hands rough and stained from days of odd jobs. He frowned, wiping his palms on a rag, then rose with wary steps. Another knock followed, louder this time. Jake's jaw tightened. He opened the door. On the threshold stood a man so strikingly out of place in their rundown building that for a moment, neither Jake nor Maya spoke. Tall, immaculate, dressed in a dark suit tailored to perfection, polished shoes gleaming, a black overcoat draped across his broad shoulders. His briefcase shone under the dim hallway light, and his posture was straight as a soldier's. He looked like he belonged to another world entirely, a world of marble floors and chandeliers. "Jacob Miller?" His voice was low, steady, professional. Jake squared his shoulders, suspicion flashing in his eyes. "Who's asking?" The man set his briefcase on his arm, opened it with a click, and pulled out a thick, leather-bound envelope, sealed with crimson wax. The seal gleamed, official and unyielding. "My name is Mr. Reynolds. I'm an attorney representing the estate of your late father." The words landed like a hammer blow. Jake froze, his hand still gripping the doorknob. His expression shifted, a storm brewing in his eyes. "My father's dead," he said flatly. "And I never had one worth mentioning." For the first time, Mr. Reynolds's stern face softened. His tone carried a note of sympathy, though his words remained precise. "I'm afraid that's where you're mistaken. Your father was a man of considerable means. He passed recently, and in his will, he named you his sole heir." Maya gasped. The laundry in her lap slipped to the floor, landing in a heap at her knees. Her hands trembled so violently she had to grip the edge of the couch to steady herself. Jake let out a bitter laugh, shaking his head. "This some kind of scam. My old man left me nothing but scars." The lawyer didn't flinch. Instead, he extended the heavy envelope, his eyes unwavering. "Inside this, Mr. Miller, is the proof. Birth certificates, testament documents, letters, and with them, a fortune worth over $200 million. Silence descended. The kind of silence that thickens the air, stretches seconds into eternities, and makes the pounding of one's heart sound like war drums in the chest. Maya's eyes darted between the envelope and Jake's stunned face. Every unpaid bill, every hungry night, every cruel whisper from the townsfolk, all of it hovered in that fragile moment. Their entire lives balanced on the weight of that sealed paper. Jake stared at the envelope, his hand hovering but unwilling to take it. His knuckles whitened with the tension running through him. His voice was rough, almost breaking. "You expect me to believe that after a lifetime of nothing, after all the years he left me bleeding and hungry, now he decides to show up from the grave with money?" Reynolds straightened, his expression firm but patient. "Not a decision, Mr. Miller. A fact. Whether you open this or burn it, the inheritance is yours. But be warned, wealth this great does not come without consequence." The warning hung heavy in the air. Maya stepped forward, her voice small, almost pleading. "Jake." Her eyes searched his face, full of fear and wonder. She wanted to tell him to take it, to rip open the seal and change their lives forever, to finally be free of hunger, of ridicule, of shame. But she also saw the turmoil in his eyes, the ghosts of his past, the scars his father had left behind. Jake's jaw clenched. He took the envelope at last, holding it as though it were a weapon. Heavy, dangerous. His fingers pressed against the seal, but he didn't break it. Maya's heart thundered. She reached for his arm, grounding him, her whisper trembling. This could be our way out, our chance. But as Jake's eyes locked on the crimson seal, another thought clawed into Maya's mind, chilling her to the bone. Wealth could buy food, shelter, respect, but it could also buy enemies, greed, betrayal. And she couldn't shake the shadow of doubt that loomed over them both. Could this fortune save their love or destroy it? The candle flickered. The envelope gleamed in Jake's hands, and the question lingered like a curse. That night, neither of them slept. The envelope sat on the kitchen table, its crimson seal catching the faint light of the street lamp through the cracked blinds. It seemed to watch them, daring them, taunting them with its secrets. Maya lay awake beside Jake, listening to the restless rhythm of his breathing. Every time he shifted, she knew he was thinking of the same thing she was. What waited inside? Money meant freedom, but it also meant temptation, and temptation had torn stronger men apart. Maya pressed her hand against Jake's chest, feeling the steady thump of his heart. She whispered silently into the dark, "Please, let this not be the end of us." Outside, the wind howled against the fragile glass. Inside, the silence between them grew louder, until it felt like the beginning of a storm. And deep within Maya's soul, one truth became terrifyingly clear. Whatever lay inside that envelope would change everything. The next morning the courthouse was packed, so crowded that people spilled into the hallways and craned their necks through the heavy oak doors. Word had spread like wildfire overnight. Jake Miller, the biker everyone mocked, the man who once scraped by fixing engines and hauling junk, had been named in a billionaire's will. Maya clutched Jake's hand as they climbed the courthouse steps, her pulse quick and unsteady. Her other hand tugged nervously at the sleeve of her plain dress, the only decent one she owned. Jake's leather jacket creaked as he moved, his face set in its usual unreadable mask. But she felt the tightness in his palm, the weight of his nerves pressing against her skin. The crowd hissed with whispers. It can't be true. He's just a thug. If it is, everything will change. The words followed them like smoke, curling into Emma's ears, choking her hope. Inside, the air was suffocating. The grand courtroom reeked of expensive perfume and arrogance. Suits gleamed, polished shoes clicked, jewelry sparkled under the high chandeliers. At the very front, Ryan Harrington lounged in his seat, smirking like a predator waiting for blood. His father, William Harrington, sat beside him, his posture stiff with superiority. They were certain this was all a mistake, certain that soon, Jake would be humiliated before the entire town. Maya's stomach twisted. She remembered their laughter on Main Street, the cruelty in Ryan's voice when he shoved Jake in public. And now, here they sat, waiting to watch his dreams crumble. The bailiff called for order. Mr. Reynolds, calm and composed in his dark suit, stepped forward. He carried the envelope like it was a sacred artifact. The hush that fell over the courtroom was absolute. The scrape of his chair echoed. The crackle of parchment sounded like thunder. He cleared his throat. The last will and testament of Charles Whitmore Miller. Maya gasped. The name struck the room like lightning. Jake's head snapped up, eyes wide. His jaw tightened, his lips pressed into a thin line. Charles Whitmore Miller, his father. The man he had only heard of in whispers. Wealthy, powerful, untouchable. A man who had abandoned him, left his mother alone, left Jake to scrape by in the dirt. Maya's fingers squeezed his hand, grounding him. Mr. Reynolds continued, his voice steady, deliberate. I, Charles Whitmore Miller, leave the entirety of my estate, valued at $200 million, to my only son, Jacob Miller. The words rang through the chamber. Gasps erupted. Murmurs surged like waves crashing against stone. Some clutched their pearls, others gaped openly, mouths hanging wide. Ryan Harrington leapt to his feet, his face flushed scarlet. This is insane. He doesn't deserve a dime. The judge banged the gavel, calling for order, but Ryan's fury cut through the noise. His voice shook with disbelief and venom. That biker trash isn't a Miller. This has to be a fraud. Mr. Reynolds didn't so much as blink. He raised one hand calmly, silencing the uproar with the authority of truth. The will is final. The estate belongs solely to Jacob Miller. The judge nodded in confirmation, papers stamped, seals pressed. The decision was law. Maya's throat burned as tears spilled freely down her cheeks. She clutched Jake's hand as though the weight of the moment might carry him away. Just yesterday, they had nothing. Empty cupboards, flickering lights, shame that pressed down like chains. And now, with a few words spoken in this room, everything had shifted. She looked around and saw the faces. The same neighbors who had laughed at her wedding, who had mocked her for choosing love over wealth, now stared with envy scorching in their eyes. Some looked like they wanted to kneel, others like they wanted to strike. And Jake? He didn't grin. He didn't pump his fist in triumph. He didn't raise his chin in pride. He only turned to Maya, meeting her eyes the same way he had that very first night in the diner, when the whole town laughed and he chose to stand beside her. Rough edges, soft eyes. That look told her what no amount of money ever could. He hadn't changed. Not yet. Not at all. They walked out of the courthouse into a storm of cameras and flashing lights. Reporters surged forward, shouting questions, microphones thrust at their faces. Jake, how does it feel to be a millionaire? Maya, will you leave the diner now? Will you take over your father's empire? What are your plans? The flashes blinded Maya. The questions blurred into noise. Jake shielded her with his arm, guiding her through the chaos. Neighbors who once turned their backs now reached for handshakes, for smiles, for scraps of attention. Their false kindnesses stung worse than their cruelty ever had. Maya clung to him, her chest tight. As the courthouse doors slammed behind them, she glanced up at him. His jaw was tight, his eyes unreadable. The money hadn't made him happy. It hadn't erased the years of pain. It hadn't silenced the ghosts. And as the crowd shouted their names, Maya felt a seed of dread take root inside her. Because if this money didn't change Jake, it would change the world around them. And she couldn't help but wonder, would the world allow their love to stay pure, or would $200 million test everything they had built? Weeks passed, but the echoes of that courtroom never fully died. The whispers still slithered through town like smoke, curling into conversations at the barber shop, the market, the church pews. Everyone knew the story by now. The biker who had nothing, the girl who chose him, and the inheritance that turned their world upside down. But if the whispers burned like fire once, they now tasted like ash. The Harrington family, once untouchable, once the town's shining royalty, crumbled beneath the weight of their own arrogance. Ryan Harrington's smirk faded from the streets. His father's iron grip over local businesses loosened until his empire cracked wide open. Lawsuits drained their coffers, banks repossessed their estates, and the very people who once bowed to them turned away, tasting revenge in every cold shoulder. The Harrington name no longer demanded respect. It earned pity, or worse, mockery. And Maya? Maya, the girl who once scrubbed sticky tables in the worn-out diner, who wore hand-me-down dresses and counted coins just to buy bread, she now walked the streets with her head high. But not because of the wealth that had fallen into her lap like some cruel joke of fate. No, her pride came from something stronger, something rarer, the love that had carried her through. The mansion Jake inherited stood tall on the hill, its marble floors gleaming, its golden chandeliers dripping with light. It was the kind of place people dreamed of in secret, the kind of place Maya used to pass by as a little girl, imagining how it would feel to be warm every winter, to never go hungry again. But when she stepped into its grand dining hall with ceilings that stretched higher than any church she had known, Maya only felt small, not unworthy, just unchanged. She still preferred the little kitchen tucked away at the back, where the air smelled of butter and coffee, where her laughter didn't echo but lived close and real. That was where she cooked breakfast every morning, pancakes, eggs, sometimes burnt toast. She hummed as she flipped them, her hair tied back, her bare feet tapping on the cool tile. Jake would lean against the doorway, arms crossed, watching her with the same crooked smile he wore the night he first offered her a ride on his beat-up bike. $200 million couldn't buy him a better smile, or her a better reason to believe in it. He had money now, more than the town could even imagine, but he still wore the same leather jacket, still rode the same bike, still came home with grease under his fingernails, because he couldn't stop tinkering in the garage, and he still held Maya's hand like it was the only treasure in the world worth keeping. Sometimes late at night, Maya would slip away from the velvet halls of the mansion and step out onto the balcony. The city lights sprawled below, a sea of gold flickering against the dark. The world seemed so big from up here, and yet, it was the quiet moments she cherished most. In those hours, memories returned like shadows, voices from the past. She's wasting her life on that biker. Love won't pay the bills. She'll regret it when she's older. How cruelly those words had cut her once, how deeply they had made her doubt. But standing there, wrapped in the silence of her new world, Maya smiled. She let the tears come, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming proof of everything she'd fought for. And she whispered softly into the night air, almost as if confessing to the stars. Love gave me everything money never could, loyalty, courage, and a forever home in his heart. Her voice trembled, but her faith did not. The world had laughed at her choices. The world had doubted her love. But in the end, the world had been wrong. For love had not only survived poverty, it had conquered wealth. But the story didn't end with Maya's smile or Jake's steady eyes. Because money has a way of testing, twisting, tempting. And though their bond was unshakable, the world around them would never stop asking the question, if you had to choose, would you marry for love with nothing or for wealth without love? It was the question whispered in coffee shops, debated in classrooms, and argued at dinner tables. Neighbors who once pitied Maya now envied her. Girls who once mocked her now dreamed of standing in her place. Men who once mocked Jake now studied the road he took. The question lingered because it was not just theirs, it was everyone's. And maybe, just maybe, that's why Maya's story lived on. Because it proved one thing with unshakable certainty. Sometimes, the poorest choice in the world is the richest one in the heart. So when you hear their story, when you weigh your own heart against the world's voice, ask yourself, what would you choose? Love or money? And if this story moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who believes in true love. And tell us in the comments below, what would you choose? Love or money?